afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you are joining us from, and welcome to the inService podcast series. My name is Sheila Ahmed, and I am the SVP of Operations here at the Service Council, filling in for John Carroll, who is recovering from a broken leg right now. We wish him the best and a speedy recovery. So, joining me today, I'm so excited. We are going to be talking about the topic of a cornerstone of a circular economy. And today I have Tony Sciarrotta, the Executive Director from RLA, Reverse Logistics Association, joining us today. A warm welcome, Tony.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Sheila.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We do want to make this an interactive conversation. So if you have any questions, you can post them in the comment area, or if you have any comment, please post them and we will get to your comments. So welcome, Tony. Thought we could start off by, can you just give us a little bit of background information, both from a personal perspective and a professional perspective?
Absolutely. And Sheila, I do want to say people are very much afraid of returns because they don't understand that John went to extreme lengths to avoid talking about returns today, breaking the leg, and I feel sorry for him. And I've worked a trade show with a broken leg, so it's no fun. John, get better, get well. And I really appreciate this opportunity, Sheila, to talk to a new audience. I have been in the last 6 years around the world talking about the reverse logistics world, the returns management world, and sharing ideas and being the evangelist that we need because the association, first off, about how did this all happen? Let's go back a little bit. Um, I was a happy-go-lucky sales guy at Sony, and I won awards. And then I went to Philips, and I won awards, sales and marketing. Happy guy, and never thought twice about returns or service because that was somebody else's job. And then one day, senior management pulled me in. They had pulled my resume out of a hat with a consultant, and they said, "You're now in charge of returns." And at the time, Philips was a $2 billion company in retail sales, consumer electronics in the United States, running about 11 to 12% return rates. And so this is around the turn of the century, and I had to go find answers. The term reverse logistics had only been used in academia for the first time around the year 1996. So it's no surprise that a lot of people still don't understand reverse logistics, but our definition is really simple. Everything that happens after the sale is part of the reverse logistics and returns management world. Everything. You take that product home, you open a box. Some of us may remember clamshells that used to rip our fingers apart, and we go to the emergency room with blood all over us from clamshells. Those are gone, but that was part of the returns world. People took that stuff back because of that. So I was fortunate, as I said, to be in sales and marketing for a number of years. So I approach service, returns, support very different than people who grow up in that industry or who move into it from finance or come into it with a technical background. I don't have a technical background. I came into this very different, and maybe that was helpful. Maybe that I understood when I went into a room and told people you're sending too much stuff back, that was a buyer who might say, "Oh, we're not going to give you a purchase order," and things like that. So it was a bit of a challenge, a bit of a challenge. So I'll pause there because I can talk for hours about being from Detroit and what that does to you when you grow up in a good way.
Well, thanks for that. And can you tell us a little bit more about RLA, the Reverse Logistics Association, and maybe a comment or two about how things have been turned around and changed, and maybe a little bit about this upcoming event I think you have?
We'll try to get all that worked in. First off, the Reverse Logistics Association did start out in 2002 as a research group and became a trade show when companies like Walmart and Dell and back then it was Genco all needed a place to connect and get together. So the Reverse Logistics Association is a trade group, industry trade group. It's a blessing and a curse to say we are the only ones in the world that do this, that focus on returns and reverse. And our members, very simply, are the retailers and the manufacturers who make stuff, sell stuff, and have lots of returns, especially nowadays. The other side would be the third party service providers or solutions partners. And those include most of the companies that are part of the Service Council because you
Yeah.
provide a service to help companies who have returned items. You also help consumers with service and so on. So RLA, very simply, members driven association. I think of what do the members need? They need networking, they need connections, they need opportunities, they need to learn about best practices, they need education, they need data, they need research. So we're trying to be all of that as any trade association, including Service Council, as you try to do. Um, so we when I took over in 2016, the RLA had run into a slump, and in 2017 I revitalized and rebuilt the trade show that we now do annually in Las Vegas at the Mirage Hotel. And that's going to be February 7th, 8th, and 9th in Las Vegas. That's been our home for almost 20 years. And We missed, of course, 2021 due to the pandemic, but we've come back last year. We had a very strong turnout, and this year, stronger. And what I want to emphasize about our conference, like yours, the focus is high content. Our sponsors and our panelists and our speakers do not advertise from the stage. We don't talk about better mousetraps. We talk about best practices, next best practices, new technologies, new ideas. And for example, we have a friend of the Service Council, I think, Nabil Nasser, is one of our keynote speakers. Nabil runs the Remade Institute. Our other keynote is Becca Mines from Best Buy, Vice President End-to-End Logistics. So on Tuesday, we have activities, Wednesday and Thursday, the conference, and we're very proud of it. I could talk for hours, but let's go on to other things. We certainly invite all of your members and your attendees and your associates to join us there. And Sheila, I think we have a way to say there's a special code, discount code for your colleagues
Yeah.
and your members and participants to join us.
Yes, really appreciate that. I think my colleague will put the discount code for 20% off. Thank you for that generous offer for our members and our listeners today. And if you don't grab it, you can reach out to me directly through LinkedIn, and I would be happy to share that with you. Really looking forward to the event, Tony. And this will be my first time attending. I know John's attended in the past, and he really speaks highly of your event, and especially with all your members, the association, and this whole passion about reverse logistics. Can you extrapolate on that term and give us a little bit more of a definition of what reverse logistics means?
Sure. I kind of threw something out there about it a little bit that
Yeah.
to me, reverse logistics is not about the flow of the goods. But the reverse logistics world, and it can be a misnomer because I mentioned about being returns management. The focus for us is what happens before the sale, because that's what triggers the return. And I learned that at Philips by doing surveys of consumers who had returned things. And I think the Service Council people would be very well aware of this, that so many technical products, consumer electronics products, are so hard to use that the majority of them that are returned have no fault found. They're not defective. And the engineers at Philips used to beat me up that you're taking this stuff back and there's nothing wrong with it. So the focus had to be, what do you do with the product? How do you promote it to reduce returns by making it easier to use? The products need to connect with other products. So that has to be a major focus. And that's my driver. That's where I come from. I hate buying something that I take home and I can't figure it out. I got to look up on YouTube how to turn something on and make it work. So it's about making the products easier to use, when you get them back, processing them as fast and as efficiently as possible. And then the third leg of the stool is about what do you do with the goods to maximize asset recovery? So it's a three-legged stool. What do you do to reduce returns? What do you do with them when you get them? And how do you recover the most from those goods? So that's the basics of a reverse logistics association. And we're going to get to this a little bit later, but we are all part of the circular economy. I'm very proud to be associated with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Circular Economy Club, and everyone else who understands that we all live in one world and everything that goes out comes back at some point one way or another. And your members, your company and organization also focus on how do we make people be able to own their own and keep their own products. And that's
Right.
important.
It's really important.
Yeah.
So I've got some statistics and trends would like to walk through
Okay.
with you and really just get your reaction to this. So I'm going to start with trend number one. According to the Service Council's Service Leaders Agenda Survey, which it's a survey that we conduct on an annual basis, and we're actually just closed the survey out. We're going to have a summary findings webinar coming up on January 31st, but we were able to pick out some of the early returns on as we're going through the analysis. So this is interesting. So one of the number one external challenges cited by service leaders is global supply chain disruptions. Yet when we look at the investments in technology they're looking to make, these service leaders are looking to make, only 1 in 5 is looking to invest in technologies that are geared towards de-risking and driving visibility, transparency, agility, and control of the reverse supply chain. And lastly, coming out of this survey, service supply chain metrics land at number 5. They're not even a high priority of these service leaders
Right.
behind what you would, cost, customer satisfaction, revenue, employee engagement. But we feel there is an opportunity here for improvement to see the supply chain recognized as critical as it should be for the service leaders agenda. What can you comment on that? Do you think there's an
Absolutely.
opportunity here?
Well, supply chain is a broad term, very broad, and it involves procurement and manufacturing, procurement, transportation, and a lot of things that cannot easily be automated. Right, a lot of that is manual, how that stuff moves, and that's supply chain. I think the emphasis in the technology has been on maximizing every inch of space on a cargo ship or a truck, maximizing production, maximizing the predictions of what you're going to need, and we're in that part of the world, service and returns. It's after the sale, and in most corporations, the P&L is set up so that all the margin is realized up to the point of sale. After that, everything else is a cost. Whether it is sending a service tech out, whether it's getting a return and processing it, those are all after the margin is made on the companies who sell goods. So it gets less attention because it's an afterthought. And reverse logistics doesn't really belong in the supply chain. It hits there by default because of the terminology. But the fact is, it's a reverse sale. And that's what we recognized at Philips. When you start to recognize that, it's not heavily embedded in supply chain except by default because nobody knows what to do with returns. And it's true. Major corporations just don't know. So I was fortunate. I started in operations at Philips, and then I was put into marketing and then into service and then back in operations. They didn't know where to put me. But I did appreciate being connected to the service organization for a while because in that space, you have to think the same way. It's after the sale, how do you make things right? So it's not selling something to somebody and they should keep it. It's what do you do to help them? And that's why supply chain kind of is a misnomer because now the focus is the customer experience, and people don't understand how much supply chain is a part of that customer experience because, again, after it's out the door, nobody's thinking about it.
So true. The second trend here, according to Gartner, the typical company provides support services and parts for an average of 7 years after an initial product sale, making service parts planning really vital, right? Aftermarket parts have profit margins as high as 10 times those for initial product sales. And together, aftermarket service and parts account for 20 to 30% of revenues and about 40% of total profits for most manufacturers. Is it shocking to you to hear of organizations who are not looking at their aftermarket service business as a strategic profit lever?
It's not only shocking, it's horrendous. And I can only speak to Philips and my experience there that I know is repeated at many companies. At one point, Philips began the process of outsourcing the entire service organization. The CEO at the time, this is in the 90s, had this vision that we will hire IBM to manage all of the service activities, including the parts, including the repairs, including everything. It wasn't that, and you're right, it is profitable. But what happens is that it's looked at by senior leaders. We're talking, the board of directors and all those people, and they look at those as costs because it's cost after the sale. And if all you think about is focusing on yourself as a sales organization, you don't think about support costs as being necessary. And I remember being in meetings where we were driving the IBM team to reduce the call times, get people off the phone faster. Well, that's a bad experience for most of us who are consumers who call up call centers. We don't want to be pushed off the phone fast. And that was a major driver. Metrics are being measured. How do you reduce the average call time, IBM? How do you reduce it? And it wasn't looked at as building customer loyalty. And
Right.
so that's the miss that they've got. And Gartner, and by the way, the other part of it is, yes, aftermarket parts have high margins. Absolutely true. And that's why companies in the auto industry focus on getting all those cores back because they can turn around, remanufacture them. I love that. That's so critical. That's circular. But the downside is, and I know this from Philips, you're buying parts for 7 years for electronics that are obsolete within that period. So you wind up writing off millions of dollars of inventory of parts that are obsolete because those products no longer are very viable as a consumer product, right? You went from cathode ray tubes, big picture tube TVs to plasma. You went from MP3 players to it's in your phone. So you're saving parts for products that have a high, fast obsolescence rate. Is it worth it? Now, there's laws that say you have to have parts or you have to have a solution. And that's what I've learned. The important part is have a solution. If you don't have the parts, like we did run out of parts at Philips for maybe a DVD player, give the customer another answer. Well, sir, the part would have cost you $45 plus labor to put it in. We'll give you a replacement DVD player for $79. And because of the erosion of electronics, that was easier to do than to build up inventories of parts. So in the electronics industry, it's a little more challenging to have parts for 7 years because Dell and HP and they all replace those products every year. Samsung, right? So there are two sides to that coin, but I'm still shocked and horrified that companies, manufacturers, don't take that service support aspect seriously and make it part of their core.
Yeah, so true. And you had a good segue into the metrics that folks are using. And according to the Service Council's KPIs and metrics benchmark survey, first time fixed rate of the best in class, the average, and then the low performers were 92%, 82%, and a whopping 52%, respectively.
Yeah.
So you can calculate, right, this financial impact by determining the quantity of jobs initiated by jobs completed.
Yep.
And then First visit, of course, repeat visits erodes, right, this achievement. And one of the leading culprits of erosion to this important holy grail metric, if you will, because it's so critical to customer experience, is parts availability. Would you argue that parts availability may just be as important as knowledge and skill sets requirements in the field?
Yes, absolutely. And parts availability, it we have to recognize the Internet of Things. We are all so connected. We're all connected here two-dimensionally on computers. And and I preached this gospel at Philips when we were selling big screen TVs and they were coming. Those are expensive. You have to send somebody out to handle. This is before plasma and LCD TVs, the big box projection TVs.
Yeah,
I suggested including a thumb drive to allow people to register their product and get it captured on the internet. Now these products, like our computers, but all televisions now, that we're all connected to the internet. So it's not hard to figure out how to connect to the product to let the product tell you what's wrong with it.
right.
This is what's going on in the medical profession, right? These
Yeah,
big expensive medical devices have built-in systems to say, help, I'm going bad, and so that tells the company, get the parts ready, get the tech ready, and be there before it breaks down. um, so diagnostic systems are becoming more common in electronics. And again, it's mostly the Dells and the HPs and the Acers. The computer people are all focused on this. Cisco focused on this, Intel. But why not the rest of the products? All of these products today in consumer electronics have diagnostic capability to tell, and they're all connected to the internet. So have it send a message and say,
yeah,
I may be going bad shortly. Otherwise, the consumer's sitting there watching TV and wow, it's gone. It's like, what happened? And now I got to call somebody and now and or more likely go buy a new one, right? That's what happens. So um, and by the way, that connection to the internet that all these devices can have by being diagnostic can also help a company determine what parts are critical and necessary and should be made more available in stock, and what parts they don't have and they're getting beeped on and they have to come up with another solution. So parts availability is critical to saving customer, but being able to do it
yeah,
in advance is even more important. That's a big trend. That first time fix rate, I'm curious to see how much of that is in the consumer electronics space, what the numbers are, because I fear that they're the low performers in consumer electronics. It's a challenge because technical failures can be intermittent, they can be unrelated. Like you fix one thing and it's really not that; it's something behind it in consumer electronics. Just a massive challenge. So parts availability is critical if you
yeah.
want to also build customer loyalty. And by the way, let's talk about one other aspect, Sheila. If you don't have the parts and you have to give the customer a new one, what are you doing with the old one? We're adding to the massive junk piles that are out there. What is the number? 53 million metric tons of e-waste annually. We're trending towards 70 million metric tons of e-waste. You can't
Yeah.
stop that unless you have parts available for people to fix the products that they have. And another aspect of it is many of these products, at least I know from consumer electronics side, they're installed, they're built, they're on walls, right? These big screen TVs are all on walls. You tell somebody, I'm sorry, we don't have the parts for that anymore. You'll have to get a new one. And they're just going to be angry as all get out because that's not the answer they want to hear. They want to know the parts available, and it should be really easy. What's inside a big screen TV? A motherboard and a couple of power supply parts. It's not hard to have the parts like they used to. Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm preaching. I get carried away,
You got
but
to have the right parts at the right time at the right place,
that's yeah. I
right?
mean, if Amazon can do it when we want to buy something, that it can be delivered to our door 2 to 3 hours later, that's the model that you and I, Sheila, and all consumers
Oh,
live by now. If they can
that's
get us products within 2 hours, why can't we get the parts for what we need to fix our? Oh yeah.
a
Okay.
conundrum. Yeah.
No, we're getting into the preaching part. I'm trying to be careful. I'm
Well,
trying
let's
to be
move
careful.
on to the
Okay, the
next
next
topic,
trend.
the next
Sure.
trend. So, according to the Service Council's Voice of the Field Service Engineer, another survey that we do on an annual basis, 61% of FSEs or field service engineers did not believe leadership listens to them or enacts change based on their feedback that they provide to help improve their businesses. 40% don't believe they have a role in innovation.
Yeah.
Yet the number one, the number three, and number five most desired mobile functionality requirements amongst those FSEs was inventory visibility, parts ordering, and parts transfer. Where do you think is the disconnect coming between the frontline and the executive management on really recognize this importance of spares?
Well, the technicians, the simple answer is the distance. There is a huge distance between senior management and frontline repair people. And therefore, it's got all these steps to go through for what the frontline experience is before it ever gets to the top level. And the top level looks at that and says, well, that'll cost us more to do something. We don't want to spend the money. We'll deal with the negative. And so there's a disconnect. What's interesting to talk about, I wasn't a frontline technician, I wasn't an FSC, but I knew when we were introducing products, which ones are going to cause a nightmare. And I'll give one simple example of a product that died a sudden death at Philips years ago. It was web TV. Okay. Before the internet was as big and easy to use, there was web TV, put it on your TV, connect it to your phone. This was dial-up days, connect it to your phone line and start to enjoy the internet from your own television set. Isn't that cool? Well, if I'd been there when I saw that they only had a 6-foot phone cord, it's like you're putting it on your TV. It's usually in a different part of the room from the wall jack. And we had a 45% return rate. 45%. And we knew because we were tracking the sales and you can see returns on the major retailers, the Walmarts, the Sears, the Kmarts, the Targets of the world, the Costco's, you know the returns. So we knew 45% within 2 weeks. We got a big problem. Why? Because we didn't design it right. And any FSC could have told them that. Anytime there's that big a gap between FSCs and top line, they lose touch. And so I would sit in room with the product marketing groups, and they didn't like me. I mean, I was the dark side. I was the devil because I would raise my hand and say things like that cord's too short, or why do you have a stop sign in your box when you open it up? That's a bad message. Put a gold star. Things like this. It's just so easy. Why is your instruction book in 12 languages? People don't get that. Give them English, real English. Give them pictures. Let it make it easy for the experience because th- the end of the day, if you can make the product better, you have less expense in the field service. You're always going to have field service, but imagine if the field service people could focus on real problems, real things that are going wrong, instead of answering the intermittent problems and the no technical failure found. It simply was a product, for example, that didn't connect with another product very well, didn't play nice with each other, right? We have that interconnectivity issue. Or products that are supposed to talk to each other via remote control, and the remote control only talks to one of the products instead of the rest of the products. Interoperability, that's another common factor.
Huge.
And I'm so proud that I know Service Council people would appreciate before the RLA, there was actually an organization called the Ease of Use Roundtable, and it was funded by Intel, one of our board companies, with Cisco, with Dell, with HP, with Microsoft, Apple, all part of it. This is, again, around the turn of the century, trying to make that experience better and easier for a consumer. The goal was a computer and any electronic device should be as easy to operate as a TV. Push the button. That was 20 years ago, and now we've made televisions a little more complicated with streaming services and things like that. But generally speaking, that disconnect happened because product doesn't get in the hands of the top line management. One other simple program we had at Philips, I brought them the concept from these Intel ease of use roundtable meetings of something called UBI. and Ubi, which is out of box experience. So Ubi is the concept that before you actually sell products into the market and ship them, somebody needs to try it themselves. Normal people need to try it themselves, not technicians, not the marketing guys who designed it, but we actually had this market introduction that included an Ubi, and the Ubi meant that one of the SVPs or above, one of the C-suite people, had to take that product home, make it work, use it before we shipped our first one. When we started doing that, it made another difference in how we reduced returns at Philips. And again, we went from that huge 12% number of returns, got it down to 4% within 5 years. Ubi was one of them. You know what else was important about Ubi? You changed the culture because every month at the MIS meetings, we call them MIS, the management information, leadership. So you gather 200 or 300 of your employees and you hold this meeting and you talk about what's going on, including hold up the box. Here's the new product. We're releasing it now. It's been approved, been taken home, tested, been approved, and we're going to raffle it off. And we did. We'd raffle off TVs, DVD players, all electronics devices, but it changed the culture. Suddenly, everyone's thinking about how good is this product for average consumer. And I know I got off it, but that's how we brought that connection together at Philips a little bit better. And then they went off and tried to outsource service. So that's a whole different
Yeah.
discussion. But trend number 4, absolutely about the disconnect between frontline. I mean, when's the last time a CEO sat down with a FSC? Right? It just
Yeah.
it doesn't happen.
But
It
it's
enough.
so important, right? Because we talk a lot
Yes.
about the employee effort and employee experience, how it's parallel to the customer effort and
ab-
customer experience. So if you're not
Excellent. Yes.
you're
Yes,
not
Sheila. Excellent.
simplifying their work and making it
Yeah.
easier for them, it's going to translate into, erosion of customer experience and customer service.
Yes.
Um, so we hear a lot, and you started to touch on this a little bit earlier. We hear a lot of focus on remanufacturing and,
Yes.
where organizations are
Yep.
um, incentivizing customers and suppliers to send back used and defective components to their depot facility to help salvage dirty core. And these components then become the building blocks for remanufactured supply chain parts that you can then recircle and create new revenue
Yep.
streams. Um, in a recent member discussion, the topic of quality, how much should you carry? How much core should we carry?
Yeah.
How do we make reproduction economical? What impacts are we making on sustainability efforts? You were, referring to all the waste and the dumping. These were a few critical areas we heard that were top of mind concerns and opportunities. Are there any key RLA members that you've heard discuss their strategy, which might be useful for or a good resource for our listening audience?
I would have to say one of the best examples on the planet would be Best Buy. And I mentioned that Becca Mines is our keynote speaker on day one. She is vice president of end-to-end logistics at Best Buy, and their focus is on how do you make the customer experience great, and if they have to bring something back or if they have to get something fixed. And keep in mind, they sell everything from major appliances down to cell phones and everything in between. So they have a great strategy for taking old things back and doing something with them. Now, the electronics industry has, as we mentioned earlier, a lot of challenges about that because of the rapid technology changes, the speed. So parts and service thing, those older products is more of a challenge. But the king of this, of course, is the auto industry. I mean, there's the example of an industry that's like every part is valuable. I mean, when you sell 15 million cars a year, cars and vehicles a year, you'd think that we'd be overrun in our landfills with old cars, but they keep them running because they bring those cores back and they resell them. They remanufacture them and then they resell them. And consumers and service places are happy to buy those products They don't need it to be a brand new, fresh out of the factory part. They're glad to have those remanufactured. I am so proud of Nabil Nasser and the Remade Institute. That's what they drive hard on, and they give grants out to people who work in that space. I love them for that. They're focused on it. Our focus is to tell people you should be able to repair your products. You should be able to get service, support, and that focus is now critical to the customer experience. And now that the customer experience is like the driver, when you look at Amazons and retailers like that and the Walmarts of the world, the customer is king. Take care of them. Doesn't mean give things away, but it means take care of them. So again, I mentioned about being proud of being connected to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the circular economy clubs around the world. That's the driver. How do we make it easier to repair, reuse, and the other shock to me in the last couple of years, it is more expensive to recycle products than to make new ones. Now there's a tipping point, but it's more expensive. That amazed me. That especially, by the way, and we're covering a lot of product categories, okay? But
Yeah.
in the area of clothing, apparel, it's not worth touching it more than once or twice. It's material, and that is, I think, I've heard the largest landfill contributor on the planet right now is apparel. If it's not number one, it's in the top five. And I mentioned electronics, of course, but that's
Yeah.
because it's just too expensive to touch it over and over versus just making a new one. So that's a frustration for me personally, but it's also going to become a frustration for everyone. So if you start with the circular economy as your goal, when you design a product, you design it so that it can be reused somehow or other. And that and by the way, I love being reverse logistics because you can't be circular without going in reverse. So it's kind of fun to be, a cornerstone of the circular economy. By default, you have to go in reverse at some point. But again, the idea is design for reuse, design for repair, design for simplicity, and we will have less to recycle. But that tipping point probably is coming close as we talk about raw materials like copper and silver and these. We're throwing so much of these cell phones away. They tell me there's enough gold in 1,000 cell phones to offset the cost of pulling it out, but not many people are doing it yet. So that's a, I've gone in a whole different direction many times with the apparel as a factor and obsolescence on electronics a factor. The auto industry is the king of rebuilding, remaking, and we love them and we'd love to follow their example. And yes, I'm from Detroit, so I get to say good things about Detroit too, being the Motor City. But yes, and again, the best example I can give is a retailer like Best Buy that, in fact, they take their returns and they'll put them back on the shelf. They'll staple a package back together and they will offer a discount on that open package.
Yep.
Just simple touches like that at their front door. You can drop off old electronics and they'll take care of them for you. I mean, it's a commitment by the companies, and they're a good example, but there's others. So it's a commitment.
You make
All
some
right.
really good points there, Tony. And given the title of this podcast is built around the circular economy that we've been talking on, which is a phrase we've heard used to describe the practice of moving goods used, defective, or expiring from customers back to the sellers or the manufacturers. RLA is the leading authority on this topic. Can you tell us more about how you interpret this important philosophy, how it's defined, and what are really the critical elements of building circularity to your supply chain?
Well, I kind of hit on it a little bit. I snuck in ahead a little bit of this one, Sheila. But to come back to it, the leading authority is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Dame Ellen MacArthur, recognized by some major Queen's Award in the UK for coming up with this concept, and just out of her commitment to the and her passion to the planet. And if you ever get to hear her speak and go on YouTube or something to listen to her speak, she's very committed to it, and she spread this philosophy. And I'm so proud. We have this advisory board at the RLA, and I always hear their voices in my head. And there's 12 of them, so it gets a little crowded. But one of them is Jack Allen, who was a board member for Cisco, and now Ian Rusher. And they both talk incessantly about taking stuff back because 15 years ago, they threw everything away. And now they have focused on taking everything back, finding reuse for it. And Jack Allen, I think, might be one of the first people with this title around that I know, the head of circular economy at Cisco. That's his title. So that's where you start to see how important this philosophy is, that companies are starting to recognize it and putting it in. And by the way, this is a move away from sustainability. That's been the buzzword, but now we're going towards circular because sustainability, it had its good definitions and good values, but circular means start at the beginning, and at the beginning plan to go in a circle. And that means what you build. And I love Eileen Fisher Apparel. And I'm sorry I'm going to different industries, but it's important to concept. Eileen Fisher, simple philosophy. They spoke at one of our webinars. Buy better, buy less. It's simple. Buy something that's better, and you won't have to buy 6 more items to replace it over the next 5 years because it's built and made better. So I love Eileen Fisher Apparel for doing that, and that's an example of the circular economy. And you have to be careful at many of our companies because we fight heads against it's cheaper to make it new than to touch it again and recycle it. And it's like, why? But it is. So we're really focused on being this cornerstone of the circular economy. And the philosophy, as I said, it's very simple: designed to be circular at the beginning. And I will tell you, if you visit companies with their marketing departments, they don't think about this. They think about what new gadget can they build that the customers will love to buy in droves, and they never think about what happens at the end of those lives. And we need to, because it's critical. Um, but again, those simple critical elements: design it right, plan for reuse, and plan for resale, and plan for a second life. That's the core element of building circularity, is plan for extending its life. And I hope that everyone will take a look at the circular economy. And really look up Ellen MacArthur Foundation or the Circular Economy Club. They participate in our events, including Las Vegas and also in Amsterdam. We'll be in June.
Well, that's some really, really great advice. And, I love that you touch upon the different industries because, we've always found that, uncommon industries have common pain points, right? And challenges.
Yes,
So everyone can learn from each other. So I love that
absolutely.
you touch upon that. So we recently re-engaged for the purpose of our mutual enhancing our mutual members' experiences through independent activities as well as through shared activities moving forward. And can you reflect on what you're looking forward to from this important new collaboration between our organizations?
Absolutely, Sheila. I am really proud not only of this alliance partnership, a few others that we have. What I've learned in the last year, and by the way, again, I was a happy-go-lucky sales guy. Okay, somehow I fell into this niche, and it's like, oh my God, we can make a difference. And I made such a huge difference at Philips. Everyone thinks I'm some kind of a hero, but we can all be heroes. But the collaboration that we're developing is all about, we are all part of the circular economy. The circular economy exists because of the Service Council, because of Siri, because of RLA, because of Terra, because of the reuse group. And I've invited not only yourselves, but several of these other organizations to be there in Las Vegas with us, because the people who are dealing with returns need to know about all the different solutions. And it's not simple, it's not easy, but at some point, if you step over the line and say, I'm going to commit to this circular economy means something, we're all part of that, Sheila. And also, we have the fortune or curse of being this association globally, and people come to us for information. And I don't have the answers. I am not a rocket scientist or any kind of a genius. I just know good people and good organizations who also have stepped over the line and say this is important. Service Council is one of them. And having you there is step one, but also having John in the future be able to speak to one of our committees or to on our webinar panels. I can tell you, and we haven't hit about the right to repair very much, but we have our monthly webinars, and I finally said, you know what, anyone can listen to the monthly webinars. These committee calls, some of these private calls are members only, but the webinar, the most successful ones we've had, repair versus return, with Gay Gordon Byrne and Sarah Kate Kim, Gay from the Right to Repair organization. And she is more of an evangelist and more passionate than I am about making that opportunity happen. And this is so important to your members and your participants, because that right to repair means if you have a John Deere tractor, you can now get it fixed by your local technician. You don't have to have John Deere flying these people because it's got special, intellectual property software stuff, things like that. So that is a big deal. And the right to repair law has now passed in the state of New York, which means that manufacturers are going to have to look at this seriously. And Sheila, you and I were touching base on why Massachusetts is famous, because in the last 2 decades, I think they passed a right to repair bill for auto industry. Meaning, if you have a Ford Mustang, you don't have to go back to Ford and get a Ford part to make it keep running. You could go to your local service guy and he could find parts for you that were just as good, or from the junkyard, and he could have the schematics and the instructions on how to fix it. The right to repair is needed because companies were starting to make it so that nobody else could touch the stuff. Now there's intellectual property involvement. You have to be careful. You can't let Apple can't and Dell can't let their codes be read. Okay, but that's not what we're talking about. We talk about replacing the fan, the motherboard, the power supply, things like that. That's anybody should be able. Any qualified technician should be able to do it. Now, there's a little risk for the consumer on the other side of that. You need to find a good place to fix it, right? But that's the same as the auto industry. You need to find a good place to fix it. So, this collaboration is important because you represent the service industry in a big way, and your members all focus on repair. And by the way, we talked about, yes, electronics can be repaired, computers can be repaired, lots of things can be repaired. I mentioned clothing because we don't think about clothing as being repairable, but it is. And an example would be companies like Columbia, Patagonia, who are taking things back, clothing,
Yep.
Nike, Adidas, taking shoes back, cleaning them up and reselling them. And Sheila, they give you a credit to buy something new, of course, but you might have jackets hanging in your closet from Patagonia or Columbia or North Face, or shoes that you don't wear anymore. And it's like, hey, Nike, I'll send them to you. Give me a credit. I'll buy a new pair. You'll take the old pair, clean them up, donate them to charity. Whatever you do with them, you'll do something better with them than sitting in my closet or me throwing them away in a trash can. So there are now clothing servicers. I love it. Helpsy and Retail Works, Reworks, and there's some other organizations. They're fixing clothes. And by the way, ultimately with clothing, there's also the opportunity to do what's called upcycling. You could take 1,000 t-shirts, shred them, and turn them back into cotton to be remade. Not cheap, but getting closer to the cost of making it new. So, service council people, you should know there's service opportunities in everything. I won't touch the food industry, but everything else, yeah, we don't want to think about that. Um, Everything else, whether it's auto, whether it's electronics, whether it's now clothing, thank God we have the opportunity to do something different, and that's coming out of that circular economy thinking. And And so the collaboration that I'm excited about with you and John, Lauren, and the rest of your team and the rest of your your community, let's call it that.
Yeah,
Your community is so important to not only help reduce returns, but do something with that product.
yeah. Really appreciate that, and we're really looking forward to the collaboration as well. We're seeing a huge growth in the interest in services supply chain and reverse logistics and this whole circular economy. It's just kind of blossomed, if you will, in our community. So we're really looking forward to being able to collaborate with you more.
And
Um,
Sheila, I know, I want to mention about the Service Council supply chain focus is important because the terminology is important. And if it's just Service Council, it's one thing. But if it's Service Council service supply chain, people listen better, they pay more attention, and you can get something done about the supply chain aspect of the service industry, which is not the core, but it's an important aspect of the service industry, along with knowledge and information.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, can you share with our listening audience, you know, and our participating audience, something that you're personally passionate about outside of work?
Well, my wife would argue about whether I'm passionate about anything else outside of work, but she also knows and she participates in our love of live music and going to concerts and discovering small artists at local festivals, music festivals is amazing. And getting to go to the best music event in my life for the last 25 years or so, I've gone to New Orleans every year for what's called Jazz Fest, and is almost a misnomer because it can be anyone from Bruce Springsteen and Paul Simon to Snoop Dogg and Ludacris and Lyle Lovett and Bonnie Raitt, 10 stages of music. It's an absolute passion of mine to go around and discover new artists that I've never heard that are amazing, because you need new in your life. You just you can't just sit still. You need new, and discovering people like the Mavericks and Parker Millsap and just these other amazing artists. And you're sitting next to them and you're talking to them after. It's an amazing experience. So it probably shows that that's just a little bit of a passion as well. Um, but I am really focused on this collaboration being great, the collaboration with anyone that deals with this life. And it's not a pretty life. I don't know, Sheila, and I'm sorry, I don't know all of your background, but when I was at Philips, being called in every month in front of the CFO to explain why we had so much returns was not fun. And you know what else? When you start to reduce them, they don't like pat you on the back very well. I'm sorry. Corporation life is just not great. But I
Well,
also learned, and I hope you provide your people with the tools to stand up in front of CFOs and say, look, you see the returns numbers high. Well, that's because the freaking inventory is valued at what it came in at. You're bringing in new stuff that's cheaper. You need to change the value of the inventory because you're losing money as a CFO. You
right.
know, and I learned how to do those fights. And also I learned how end to end is critical. People need to understand the end-to-end cost of even service, of even parts, but what's the cost of not doing it is also important. And finally, and by the way, at many corporations, I feel sorry for anyone in a corporation because the CFOs tend to rotate, right? They have a good couple of years and then they make money and they look good on paper and then they go somewhere else. Then next year is a bad year, but that CFO is gone. So now the punishment is on people like us to take and say, why are the numbers so bad? So there's always an education process in there, and I want to encourage your people. My most important note from the stage used to be, if you are not in finance and you're not from finance and you don't have a financial background to know how to stand in front of a CFO, you need a drinking partner who is in finance. Okay. Because you're going to need a lot of drinks to understand all of the complications. And it's very challenging for us in the after sale market, because explaining to a CFO how it works and they don't want to hear more than 30 seconds worth of information, really.
Right.
I may be generous there, but anyhow, I also appreciate. I see a comment in the chat box.
Yeah,
I
I'm
didn't see
gonna
any.
post it right here. Here.
Yeah, Jim
So
Orco. Thank
Jim
you.
Orco, Tony Sciarrotta, thank you. We have found the repair and rework of furniture, strollers, smart outlets, and other consumer goods to be an effective way to keep items out of the landfill
Yes.
while getting OEM products in the hands of consumers.
Yes.
Win-win. We love doing your rework accomplishments. See you in February.
Uh,
Love it. Thank you, Jim, for the comment.
yeah. Thank you very much. No questions came through, but by the way, Jim just threw out. Who would think of strollers being refurbished, right? It's fantastic, and I thank you, Jim. I love comments like that. Keep it out of landfill, and by the way, I've actually been accused in these financial discussions and meetings with CFOs of being anti-capitalist. It's like, well, you're advocating for stuff that'll reduce our sales because if people have to keep buying new, and it's like, Are you kidding me?" And yeah, that actually happened once. I was actually accused of being anti-capitalist because I wasn't helping the sales department sell more. I was trying to reduce returns and sell less. I'm like, I wish I was kidding, Sheila. I wish I was kidding, but that actually happened. Um, and again, now I'm grateful that this focus is on the customer experience because again, we did the surveys. We know that most people return things. They know there's nothing wrong with it, but it
Yep.
didn't meet their expectations. And that's where service feedback to the original marketing people, there's another two groups that never talk to each other. Marketing is like sell, sell, sell. Service is like, but we have to fix it more and more and more. It's like put them together so that the product is easier to use, but you might sell a few less pieces because people are happy. But if they're happy, they'll tell their friends, right? Net promoter
Mhm.
score and things like that. I also love that concept too. So I know we're
Perfect.
wrapping up, but are there any other questions from you, Sheila, or anyone else?
No, I don't see any posted, but we're really looking forward to your event in February, and joining you in Las Vegas. One of your guest speakers is actually going to be featured on our next podcast, Shannon Beecher, who is the
Oh,
Vice
from
President of Services Supply Chain at IBM. She'll be
IBM.
joining us on Tuesday, February 2nd. And so we're really looking forward to speaking with her. We will also be launching our supply chain survey that will go out in a couple of weeks. So we'll have some good stats for you, hopefully, by the February event as well. And we also have a webinar next week that is going to be on the circular economy. One of our partners who will also be at your event on process. We're going to be talking with Bridie Norman from Electa and Daryl Edwards, who is an associate professor of supply chain at the University of Tennessee, and their CMO, Andy Bailey, will be with us. So join us
Great.
on Thursday for our webinar with John Carroll.
You just threw out a number of great names. I love the academics. I'm proud of University of Tennessee. They provide us with keynote speakers, presentations. Auburn University, Arizona State University, University of Nevada. They're all academic members. American Public University that actually offers a degree in reverse logistics. Thank God, and an MBA in reverse. So great people on process. Not only are they part of us, they are part of the board, and we're very proud of that. And so you just mentioned some great names. We're on the same page. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really looking forward to next week. And thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Sorry there, I lost
No worries.
lost my voice. All
No
right,
worries. Have a good day.
take care.
Thank you.